Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Recovery Comes Home Radio. Today, I am so excited to introduce our next guest. Paula M. Kramer has been a friend of mine for about 2.5 years. We met on a place where I was in the hot seat and very green. And so she's very gracious to come on and help me launch this podcast, Recovery Comes Home Radio, so we can talk about the changing face of addiction. Paula M. Kramer is an international bestselling author. She's an international professional speaker and a TV producer for Boss Ladies TV that officially launched in October of 2022. And most recently, the Soft Skills Mastermind founder. She's got some really strong professional experience behind her, but she's also got some personal stories that I think we can all relate to. And that's what we're all about here at Recovery Comes Home Radio. We're really trying to change the face of recovery because the face of addiction has already changed. It doesn't look like the bum on the street anymore. It looks like you and me. So Paula, with that, please introduce yourself to our audience.
I am a survivor, but I am also someone who promotes positivity. I call myself a positivity promoter, which is how I survived my life. My mother stereotyped me as a threat the day I was born and tried to kill me twice. When the physical attempts to murder me failed, she spent the rest of my childhood doing her best to kill me mentally and emotionally. And I was a baby when she tried to kill me, but I have memories. And on one of my websites, I have a page called Murder Secret Families, where I provide research that shows that babies who experience trauma can have visual memories. We don't have words in baby brains, but we can remember visuals. So I remember the murder attempts.
Wow.
But to live with my mother, I separated those memories into physical, mental, and emotional pieces that I couldn't put together because I didn't know how to cope with them. And at age 14, I started compulsively overeating to bury the memories since I didn't know what to do with them. And
That's such a tumultuous time, isn't it?
Yes. And my mother was a narcissist. Her mother was a paranoid schizophrenic. When I was 34 years old, it took until 34 years old to find out what the stereotype was that made me a threat. And my brother, the one who came after me, there were 6 of us, explained the stereotype to me. He told me that I was supposed to be a boy. I wasn't supposed to be a girl. I was supposed to be a boy because our mother was raised to believe she could be a worthy woman only as the mother of a son.
Wow.
And yeah,
that's deep.
That was it. My mother was the second daughter who was supposed to be a son. My grandparents had a baby boy first who died in infancy. Then my Aunt Terry was born, and then my mother. I have no idea if my grandmother tried to kill my mother, but she threatened her husband, my grandfather, with a butcher knife. He took it seriously enough that he left the family. So he left probably when my mother and Terry were in their teens, and whatever nurturing my mother had left with her father. She was left with her mother, who did not know how to nurture. So my mother did not know how to nurture her own 6 children, and she was abusive, emotionally abusive to all of us, including my father, who really loved my mother and would go off to work, come home, and drink 2 to 3 quarts of beer a night to cope with the way she treated him, her emotional abuse toward him. So I knew he loved me. He told me I was his favorite child, which is something parents normally shouldn't tell their kids, but it saved me sane as a child. But I was afraid of him. I was terrified of my mother. I was afraid of my father because burying your feelings with alcohol doesn't keep the feelings down. They come out. And he would explode in rages that could last hours or days. And during one of those rages, he broke my sister's arm. Not intentionally, but he broke her arm. So I was afraid of my father. And I started developing soft skill strategies as a child to survive my childhood. And I reached out to people outside of my family. The first person who made me feel safe in the world was my first, second grade teacher. She got married in the middle of the year and left. And it's too long ago for me to remember exactly what she did, but I felt safe in her classroom. Then I kept working at these soft skills because obviously they were helping. And when I was 11, I said something to the principal at the time. This was a Catholic school, Catholic elementary school. So it was a nun, Sister Vianney. I said something to her that she liked so much that she had me come to her office for conversations.
Wow.
I no longer remember what we talked about, but I remember sitting across the desk from her, having a wonderful time. We talked and we laughed. It was wonderful. And at age 11, because of those conversations, I began feeling equal to anybody in any room. I felt equal to anybody in any room since age 11 as a girl.
Wow.
Yes. So I realized over
You're
time.
brave.
I realized
and
over
strong.
time that soft skill power strategies can attract unimagined success. As an 11-year-old, I attracted this principal who made me feel equal.
Yeah.
So I kept on. Then at 14 is when I started eating. When I was 12 years old, was in school, and a kid who had a crush on me, a boy, pulled my chair out from under me. I landed hard on my tailbone. Medical professionals misdiagnosed that injury for 33 years.
Oh,
and
gosh.
I was left with out of place pelvis, hips, and vertebra. So I've had trouble earning money because how do you earn money when sitting and standing normally are excruciating? So then I had to develop other skills. I mean, I had to use my soft skills in other ways. And I actually survived because when my daughter was 10 years old, she started babysitting and used her money to help buy food and pay bills. My mother taught everyone in my family to ignore what I said and discount what I did to protect herself if I ever said, Mom tried to kill me. So they all discounted what I said and ignored what I did. So it didn't matter that my pain started when I landed hard on my tailbone. I must be emotional. The pain must be emotional.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exaggerating and it's emotional pain. And doctors, same thing. The last diagnosis I got was that I was emotional. And if I just kept doing what hurt, the pain would go away.
Right.
My pelvis, my hips, and my vertebrae were out of place. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't know enough about my back at the time.
Right.
But left me with invisible pain. And then when I was 28 years old, my husband died when our daughter was 8 months old. So I had 3 long-term life tragedies to cope with by age 28. And I just...
Life-altering.
Yes, life-altering. That's right. That's good. Life-altering tragedies. And I just kept being as positive as I could. I managed to get a good job in Chicago that I could do. The pain in my spine wasn't terrible at first. It hurt only a little bit. It didn't hurt all the time. The spine pain it was never all the time. It was when I sat or stood or did certain things physically, but it just kept increasing. So I did get a good job when I was in Chicago in my mid-teens. And then I met my husband and moved to Chicago where we lived. We moved to Wisconsin where we lived until he died. Then I went back to my parents, came back to Wisconsin, which I love. I love where I live. And I was poor because my bones were out of place and I had no husband. And I was living on Social Security and food stamps and Medicaid and rent help. And I started writing letters to the editor because I would hear people say terrible things about people in poverty, people getting food stamps, single mothers. So I started writing letters to the editor to just just try to bring some reality to what people were thinking. And I wrote about poverty. I did research. I'm really good at research. I did some research and I lived near a university. So I had the university library to do research.
Right.
And I did research and wrote letters based on research. Well, I had a friend who was in a babysitting co-op. She went to the babysitting co-op meeting one day where someone else, another woman asked, does anyone here know Paula Kramer?
Oh my gosh.
Yes. My friend said, I do. And the woman asked my friend, is Paula fat? And does she sit in front of the television set all day eating potato chips? That was the stereotype about women who got food stamps, that we were fat and sat on the television set all day eating potato chips. We weren't feeding our kids. We were watching television eating potato chips.
Yeah, it must be your fault.
So I got a lot of hostility.
Yeah.
But I kept writing letters, and I also wrote a series about SDI. This is President Reagan's Star Wars Strategic and Defensive Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. It was going to put satellites around the Earth to protect the missiles. Well, I did research and wrote letters, a 6-part series about how it couldn't work. And about the nuclear pollution from this kind of missile, this kind of satellite, this kind of activity. And I started getting many more positive responses. I moved to a new village while I was writing those letters, and someone stopped me on the street, someone who lived in a village, and said, "You must be really brave writing those letters. Thank you for writing them." I wrote a letter about Senator Joe McCarthy, who was part of the Red Scare in the 50s, and who blacklisted people from Hollywood because they were supposedly communists. I wrote a letter. There was somebody who wrote an admiring letter about Joseph McCarthy. So I wrote a letter saying, "Nope, he damaged the lives of hundreds of Americans."
Yeah.
Man called me up to thank me for writing that letter because he knew one of those women whose lives had been damaged by
Wow.
Yes. And I got letters. And there was one day my daughter went to her grandparents' house for the weekend, when I met with friends of mine at a bar where we would go dancing to reggae music. One of my friends said, "All of the letters in the newspaper today are about you."
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I got a lot of attention, a lot of it negative. That day, one woman wrote a letter and said I was hiding behind my daughter and looking for free handouts. I said, "I'm a widow. So I had a baby. I was a widow with a baby. I had pain in my back. I wasn't going to go out and look for a job and leave my daughter alone because she'd already lost her father. I didn't want her to lose her mother for 40 hours a week because she'd already lost her father. I was hiding behind my daughter and looking for free handouts." But a woman who worked with that woman, with the letter writer, called me up and said, "She's just always concerned about money. She's just greedy herself." So I wrote these letters for about 9 years regularly. And after about 4 or 5 years, I realized that I wasn't eating as much, that I wasn't feeling compelled to stuff myself. I had gone through periods, mostly in my early 20s, when I would just eat compulsively for days. And at one point in my younger years, I decided I was never going to give myself, and when you drink too much, a hangover. I was never going to give myself a hangover. I was never going to drink enough to give myself a hangover. Well, I gave myself food hangovers.
That's right.
Myself for days. I gave myself food hangovers. So I was no better than anybody who drank and gave themselves an alcohol hangover. That was more in my 20s. In my 30s, of course, I had my daughter, and I was writing those letters. After about 4 or 5 years, I realized I was eating less. The compulsion to eat was fading away. And
because of your purpose?
Because of what?
Your purpose, that now you have these letters to the editor that you're writing.
I had a purpose. I was going to tell the world the reality of poverty. I was going to do that. I was going to tell them the reality of a few other things too, but I was going to pass on information.
Yeah.
By 1989, which was 25 years after I started overeating, I was pretty much finished with binge eating. It was just gone. I had one really minor incident in 1991, but since 1991, there's been nothing. And it wasn't until 1998 that I began to understand why those letters ended my compulsive overeating. In 1998, I learned about DISC behavior styles, DISC.
Mm-hmm.
The DISC behavior styles the theory was invented by the man who created Wonder Woman, William Moulton Marston. He created the DISC theory in 1928, and he created Wonder Woman in 1941.
Nice.
And so he had this obviously different way of viewing the world. And his identifiers, behavior style, were dominance, inducement, steadiness, and compliance. He didn't copyright his theory, so anybody can research further and make changes. And so a lot of us have changed the identifiers. I use dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And I learned about these behavior styles, and then I learned about what I call Springer guiding values. Both William Moulton Marston in 1928 and Edward R. Springer in 1928 wrote about their two theories. Springer wrote about what he called the 6 attitudes. Many people today, like me, call them values because they guide our decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And Springer wrote about a complicated set of values, 2 values that combine together to guide our decision making. They influence each other. I call them guiding values because they guide our decisions. So I learned about the disc behavior styles and Springer guiding values, and I realized that when I wrote those letters, I was satisfying disc behavior style needs and Springer guiding value passions. Mm-hmm. And that's why the binge compulsion faded away, because I was satisfying my needs in ways that nobody else was satisfying. I was doing it for myself. And I influence people who are influenced. They want to change the world. And I wanted to change understanding about poverty. Gets its stress relief from quiet activities. And writing is a quiet activity. So I wrote to influence, and my guiding values are helping in knowledge. So I help people with knowledge to change their own lives. And that just made me feel wonderful. And the responses I got, I haven't told you yet my favorite response in person from my letters. I started college at age 35, because if I had gone at age 18, my mother would have controlled where I went and what I did. And even though I hadn't allowed myself to put the pieces of my memories together yet, I still didn't want her to control my life. And so at 35, I started college, and I was writing letters while I was in school. I was taking a tutoring class to tutor writing, walked into the classroom, introduced myself to another non-trad in the classroom. She said, "You're Paula Kramer?" "She's Paula Kramer." "You're Paula Kramer?" Because of my letters to the editor.
Wow.
Because, in fact, I've lived in this house for 36 years. And I started writing letters before I moved out here. Within the last 6 months, probably within the last 4 months, I introduced myself to 2 people in the village. I went for a long period when I didn't say my last name, because I did get a lot of hostility from my letters, and I never knew who. You can't tell just by looking at someone who's going to be hostile.
No, you can't.
So for a long time I didn't, but it was in my home village. And I said my last name. 2 people said, "Oh, you write letters to the editor." And they both thought I was still writing letters. It's been 40 years since I wrote letters.
Wow.
The memory is so strong about the letters that they both thought I was still writing letters.
Oh, that is too funny. You got a fan club built in.
Right. And so, well, I think one of them didn't like the others and one did, because one of them said only, "I thought you were still writing letters," but then didn't comment. The other one wondered why I had stopped. And I said, "Well, I'm writing about the same subjects in different ways." And she said, "Oh, that's good." So,
and that's really what we're about here, is looking at things from a different perspective and saying, okay, get out of the medical model, get out of the hamster wheel that just is getting you in a system you can't get out of. Notice that the lock is on the inside of your door.
It is.
Unlock it and then open the door and walk out.
And I have to make the point that my overeating ended substantially by 1989. I did not put together the memory pieces, physical, mental, and emotional pieces, until 1992. I didn't say my mom tried to kill me until it was 1992. So I no longer needed food to bury those pieces, those memories, because I had enough validation, enough positivity, enough success in the world that I didn't need the compulsive overeating anymore.
You were giving yourself what you wish you had gotten from others.
I was giving myself what I needed, yes.
And we can grieve because, like we talked about before the interview started, you can die many ways before you actually experience physical death.
Yes, you can die many ways before you experience physical death, yes.
And there's I'm imagining a lot of work that goes into processing those traumas. And I want our listeners to really understand that getting some help for what you're going through, even if we're talking about a stellar support group, sometimes it requires outside help, some therapy.
I did go to therapy for 5 years.
Yeah. And, that we are in the make it available business. We're like, here's the plethora of options. And within certain guidelines, then you pick and choose what makes your program individual. That's what makes us different, is we try and incorporate the whole family, the whole person holistically, because you can't just drop somebody off after they've been in 28 days of treatment and they go off the cliff, because 80% of the people go back home and they're drunk on the plane.
And I had to leave my family. I have no contact with any family on either side.
Yeah.
Because My mother was so good at convincing people to ignore what I said and discount what I did. The only way I could be in touch, have relationships with anyone in my family, is to pretend to be someone I'm not. And I refuse to do that. I'm going to be who I am.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about the switch from the need for external validation or extrinsic motivation versus what you've got now, which is an internal compass and an intrinsic motivation to do what you do.
The switch for me with my family was in 2000. So
what about the switch from eating?
From eating? The switch from eating, that came over time.
Over time.
Yeah, from those letters to the editor. That came over time. It was a slow switch. It was a slow growth, I suppose, of my confidence of being in the world. I always felt positive about myself, but because of all the stereotypes I've lived with, I often felt I couldn't succeed in the world.
Yeah.
And in fact, my letters brought me to where I am today because I was writing about poverty and not having enough food. And one day after I'd had one of those letters in the paper, a woman called and asked, "Are you the Paula Kramer in the paper?" And having no idea what to expect, this could always make me cry.
Yeah.
She asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" And for about now, I didn't get much help from my siblings. They didn't give a damn that my daughter was living in poverty. My mother didn't care. And so to have a stranger ask me, "Is there anything I can do to help?" was just astonishing. And for about 14 months, this family was in our lives for about 14 months. Her church group gave us a gift certificate to a grocery store for $40. Her teenage daughter babysat my daughter once, who was about 3 at the time, once when I had an appointment. They had us over to their house for tea. I had the woman over for tea. And then there was a bad situation on Christmas Eve. I found out I was being stalked where I lived. One of my neighbors told me I lived in a mobile home park, the poor place for people in my area. And my neighbor told me that he'd seen a man walking around my house looking in the windows. And I later figured out who he was and realized that his mother lived down the road from me. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. So that Christmas, I decided I wasn't going to be home because we were going to my in-laws' house on Christmas Day. That was the plan. But I didn't want to be in my house on Christmas Eve. So I asked a friend of mine who was going out of town and had a wood stove if I could stay at his house and feed the stove. He said, "Sure." So we went there. And because of my pain, my out-of-place bones, we slept on the floor in the room where the stove was because all the beds were too soft for my back.
Wow.
My mother was 6 at the time and mostly slept through the night, didn't have to go to the bathroom. But at 3 a.m, she woke up and said she had to go to the bathroom. And there was smoke down to about 3 feet above the floor. If we we'd have died of smoke inhalation. It was 15 below out, but I opened all the doors and windows for an hour. The pipe had come out of the back of the wood stove. Somehow it had moved on its own. It was attached to the wood stove when we went to bed. It was away from the wood stove when we woke up in the middle of the night. And 15 below, my old car wouldn't start. So we were stuck there. And I called my sister-in-law and asked her to pick up my daughter so that she could get to Christmas. I was going to get the car, but I think I had my sister-in-law drive me home. And I called that family on Christmas morning, explained what had happened, and asked if I could come to be with them for Christmas. And they said yes. And
isn't that wonderful?
Oh, yes. And once asked my older sister if we could come down for Christmas, and she said, "We don't have enough space."
Yeah, it's tough when the support isn't coming from your family.
So I did.
And you have to look elsewhere because
before I felt so overwhelmed by stereotypes.
Yeah.
Up to that family, I thought I couldn't succeed in my own family. I had trouble succeeding in society because I was a single mother with pain in my back. Because of that family, I had thought about going to college after my husband died, but I thought American society won't let me succeed in college. Because of that family, I decided I was part of American society and I could go to college and I could succeed. So because of that family, I am here. And because of writing those letters to satisfy my need to change the world for people and help them with knowledge.
And we're big into writing. I write my grandmother every day. We're big in meditation and journaling and all of that too. I find writing my grandmother keeps me sane. I try to write her things about the things that are going on in the world today. And I find myself with a lack of vocabulary to adequately articulate what's happening. But it's really helped keep me sane to have a place for my feelings that I know is safe. And when she died, I talked to God and I said, I have a relationship with you and I've never seen you. And now I've got this relationship with my grandmother that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
Help me, show me how to have a relationship with her when she's not in this physical world. And that's kind of what I came up with. But our audience is people that are in addiction recovery, the loved ones of people that are in addiction recovery, and the professionals in the addiction recovery world, because we think that it's time to shine a light that this problem is not going away. It's a public health crisis. More people have died of suicide and overdose than have died from COVID. And it's just everybody knows the fentanyl is coming across the border, but nobody knows what to do when addiction comes calling at their door. Who do you trust? Who do you call?
And some people like me don't have parents who are going to support them through recovery.
That's a great point, because we run a facility where quite a few of our residents have to get help from their families to get in. And we have just recently partnered up with someone that's in a different part of our state that does scholarships to get people into recovery residences. Because, as I said, 80% of the people go home, but that means 20% of the people come to a facility like ours.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can make it to a year, you have an 80% chance of surviving long-term, sober. And if you don't make it to the first year, you have a 15% chance or less that you'll make it.
Wow.
And we're losing our children to poison. I mean, there's addiction problems for sure, but there's also an unintentional poisoning that's going on right now.
Yes, there is.
So, and you've highlighted some of the things that we can do that are more positive, expressing ourselves, articulating ourselves in a way on paper, whether it's a letter to the editor or a note to my grandmother in the journal, or just you writing in a notebook random thoughts or an idea journal, something to get out of yourself.
Or for some people, making a short video for themselves.
Making a short video for themselves.
Right.
I didn't used to like my voice. And that's a bit difficult because we're using our voice to make money. I mean, we're using our voice as a vehicle to get our message out.
Right.
But ultimately, we are a business. And so I recorded a meditation. I played on one device, I played the ocean sounds. And on the other device, I recorded a meditation in my own voice. And I made it that I was surrounded by people that loved and cared for me and were the biggest cheerleaders. When you're the underdog and you've got that one person like your principal that takes the time to change the trajectory of somebody's life.
And remember, I said something to her.
Yeah.
So when you say positive things to people, you invite them to create success for you in some way. Not everyone will, but you're not going to find the people who will unless you make a connection.
Unless you use up, speak up, and use your voice.
Yes.
Ask for help, even if you don't know what help you need. Say, you know what? I'm overwhelmed and I got so many things on the plate. I don't know what to do next. I need help just sorting through all the stuff so I can get my life back on track. Well, this has just been great, Paula. As we're coming to the close of our time, I want to ask you the question that I ask everybody. If you could go back and sit across from that 12-year-old little girl, do you think that there's anything that you could have said to her or needs that could have been met? Advice that you would have that you've gained over the years that you would take back to your younger self?
Well, actually, I was already doing what I needed to do. Because of my father's love, not everybody has love from either parent, but because of my father's love, I felt positive about myself. And I was already listening to positive words I could trust. And I was speaking positive words others could trust, because that's obviously how I attracted the principal. And I also said positive words to myself. So even if you don't have someone like I had, like my father, you can still say positive words to yourself. I never say anything to myself. I never say I'm stupid. I do say that was a stupid thing to do, but I never tell myself that I'm stupid. Things like, well, if I turn the key this way, the door will open instead of that way where the door locks. That's the kind of thing I say to myself.
Well, and we have lots of parents who blame themselves, do all kinds of things, wring their hands, they're exhausted, they're tired of waiting for the phone to ring. And so they really have to dig deep because they're burnt out, they're exacerbated. And that's where hopefully we come in to get that middle ground. Yes, the treatment center has already told them they need to go to meetings, they need to get a sponsor, they need to get a job. They need to find a place to live that's a sober environment, but they don't show them how to do that. And people need to be led by the hand sometimes and just said, look, I believe in you and I know you can do this. Let me instill some belief in you until you have belief in yourself.
That's right. And it's all small steps. All of my success
Small steps.
from small steps. I realized that my soft skills strategies took positive control in the small spaces of situations and relationships. My mother said something negative to me practically every day of my childhood. The only day of the year I could be sure she didn't say something negative was Christmas Day. When I got my first job at age 18 at the bottom of a corporation, I started hearing one woman saying negative things. And I decided I wasn't going to listen to it if I could do something about it because I had to listen to toxic talk at home. So I took positive control in a small situation and I got the results I wanted. I got the toxic gossip to stop.
And then it just builds. It builds and it becomes like a muscle that grows.
Right. And I think that I stopped the toxic gossip against another person. And then I faced a situation in which I had been friendly to a woman who suddenly was no longer friendly to me. For about a week, I decided on a strategy to be positive words that she could trust. And then she was suddenly friendly again. And I think the man that I was able to stop the toxic gossip about saved my relationship with that woman.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of any other way that she would change. Somebody had said something negative to her about me, and then he said something positive because he was suddenly back to being really friendly.
And that's really what it's about, right? I mean, we all have things that we have to go through in our life, and we all need a support system around us. Sometimes that's a family of origin. Sometimes it's a family of choice. Family looks a lot different today than it did 50 years ago. Many things can make up a family, but the common bond is connection.
And even when you're in a bad situation, if you take positive control in whatever small space or relationship you can, you invite bystanders to stand up for you. You invite bystanders to do something for you.
Or for the next person that they see down the road.
Right.
It can ripple effect, right? The ripple effect.
Right.
Well, I think if we've learned anything from you today, it's these small steps. And recovery does such a good job at rewarding people in the beginning for taking the small steps. The white key tag, then the 30 and the 60 and the 90 days. And then you have to wait until 6 months. And then you have to wait 6 more months to a year. So they're gradually getting the celebrations longer and longer because you need a lot in the beginning. You need a lot of cheerleading.
Well, I still need small successes every day.
Yeah. And those small steps will lead to great things in your life. Right. That is the way. One of the slogans that I have a love-hate relationship with is you'll get a life beyond your wildest dreams. They tell them that in the very beginning and nobody even knows what to dream. Mm-hmm. They've forgotten how to dream. But it is a true story. You continue doing the next right thing, the next right step, and the accolades will come.
I call them unimagined successes.
Unimagined successes.
And they come from other people. That's why they're unimagined, because you don't think of them because you don't know they're possible. But other people make them possible when they see you doing something they like you to do.
That's why we stress open-mindedness so much. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness are 3 that are pretty much required. I think you've really enlightened us on the scope of what kinds of things can happen when tragedy strikes or when you have trauma, but you've also given us a lot of clues. And I believe that success leaves clues on how to turn that the tragedy into triumph. I'm with you on that. So on that note, everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in. I'm so honored that you came on. And everybody, I will include Paula M. Kramer's information in the show notes if you want to get with her on her website. She's got social media links, any way to get in contact with Paula. And I really encourage everybody to do that because she's really making a difference in her world and a great lady to know.
Thank you, Adrienne.
See you everybody next time. Have a great afternoon, evening, or morning. Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.